When I first met Brian, he wasn't the type of guy who turned heads. He wasn't tall, he wasn't flashy, and he didn't have that smooth-talking confidence a lot of women go crazy for. He was quiet, steady, and maybe even a little plain. At first, I didn't think much of him. But the night we met at a mutual friend's dinner party, something about the way he listened stuck with me. When I talked, he didn't just nod absently or look over my shoulder for someone more interesting. He gave me his full attention. His brown eyes focused, his soft smile patient, his questions thoughtful. It was the first time in a long while I felt like someone wasn't just waiting for their turn to talk. At that time in my life, I had just come off dating a string of so-called bad boys. Guys who lived paycheck to paycheck but acted like kings at the bar. Men who bought bottle service on Friday and borrowed money by Wednesday. I told myself I was done with chaos, done with chasing highs that always left me lower than before. So when Brian asked me out for coffee, I said yes. He was a freelance graphic designer back then. His apartment was modest, sparsely decorated except for a few framed sketches on the walls. He worked long hours at his computer, designing logos and websites for small local businesses. The money wasn't glamorous, but he was proud of what he did. He spoke about fonts and layouts with the same passion some men reserved for sports or cars. At first, I admired it. Here was a man building something from scratch instead of coasting through life. In the beginning, I loved bragging about him. He's so disciplined, I'd tell my girlfriends. He works for himself. No boss breathing down his neck. They'd nod politely, though sometimes I caught a hint of skepticism in their eyes. They were dating men with corporate jobs, men with salaries and benefits. Brian, on the other hand, pieced together his income month to month. But I ignored that. I told myself passion was more important than stability. Fast forward 3 years into the relationship, and my admiration had worn thin. Passion doesn't pay for vacations. Dedication doesn't get you a new car. And stability is a lot less appealing when you're still living in a one-bedroom apartment with IKEA furniture while your friends are buying houses and posting honeymoon pictures from Bali. That's when the comments started. At first, they slipped out casually, almost like teasing. Do you ever get tired of staring at that screen? Maybe if you had a real job, we could finally travel somewhere nice. You've been at this for years. When does the big break actually happen? He'd usually smile and brush it off. Sometimes he'd say softly, I'm building something. It takes time. Other times he'd look at me for a moment too long, like he was wondering if I really believed in him at all. The truth was, I didn't anymore. One night, we went out with friends. A few of the guys were bragging about their year-end bonuses, talking about buying new cars and planning trips. I felt the old sting of comparison creep up. Wanting to be part of the conversation, I laughed and said, well, Brian's still just drawing cartoons for pennies. Maybe one day he'll get a real job. The laughter around the table was awkward, forced. Brian chuckled too, but I could see it in his eyes. That flash of hurt he tried to hide. On the way home, I expected him to be angry. Instead, he was quiet. He kissed my forehead when we got inside and went straight to bed. The fact that he didn't fight made me feel even worse, though at the time I pushed it down. After that, something shifted. He stopped showing me his work. He stopped asking for my feedback or sharing the excitement when he landed a new client. He withdrew, keeping his victories to himself. At first, I thought he was sulking, so I doubled down. I told myself maybe if I pushed harder, he'd finally grow up and get serious. When he mentioned wanting to expand into animation, I scoffed. Animation? That's not going to pay the bills. When are you going to grow up and get serious? He just looked at me for a long moment before saying, one day, you're going to wish you believed in me. The breaking point came at a friend's wedding. During dinner, I made another joke, saying, guess I'll be the one paying for our wedding if Brian doesn't land a big client soon. People laughed politely, but then the bride's sister turned to Brian and said gently, don't let her talk to you like that. Your work is amazing. I'll never forget the way his face softened at her words. That tiny smile of gratitude, the kind I hadn't seen from him in months. It was the moment I realized I wasn't his safe place anymore. I was his biggest critic. A week later, he came home, set his keys on the counter, and said, I signed a lease for a new place. I'm moving out. I panicked. What? You're just going to throw us away because I joked around? He shook his head. You didn't joke. You've been tearing me down for years. I need someone who believes in me, not someone who makes me feel small. I begged, I cried, I promised I'd change. But he didn't waver. He packed his things, hugged me one last time, and whispered, "You're going to regret this." And he was right. Within 6 months, Brian's animation work exploded. One of his videos went viral, and suddenly he was signing contracts with major brands. His Instagram filled with photos from studios in New York and LA. He traveled, collaborated with influencers, and spoke on panels about creative entrepreneurship. He looked confident, magnetic. Like the man I should have been cheering for all along. Meanwhile, I was stuck scrolling through social media, watching him shine in a world I never believed he'd reach. My friends stopped inviting me out because they'd chosen his side. Even my own family said things like, "He really made something of himself. Too bad you couldn't see it." The worst part? That girl from the wedding. The bride's sister who defended him. Showed up in his posts. Smiling with him at events, holding his hand in photos. She believed in him when I didn't. She got the man I broke. Now, every night, I lie awake in the same apartment where I once mocked him. The silence is heavy, suffocating. I replay every cruel word, every dismissive laugh. I think about how different things might have been if, instead of tearing him down, I had stood beside him. But regret doesn't change the past. He didn't need me to build his dream. He just needed me to believe in him. And I couldn't even do that. So now he's living the life I never thought possible, and I'm left alone with nothing but the bitter truth. I lost him not because he failed, but because I failed to see his worth.